আমাদের একটা সুন্দর লাইব্রেরি ছিল তখন, এবং when I say সুন্দর it means very rich library, and we all went to the library to look for some idea about what to write on কবর কবিতা, and to our surprise এই 128 বা 32 লাইনের কবিতার এত মোটা একটা বিশ্লেষণ, about 500 pages একটা বিশ্লেষণ, একটা বই আমাদের লাইব্রেরি থেকে তখন আমরা পেয়ে গেলাম, এবং যে যার মতো করে তখন এই কবর কবিতার অ্যাসাইনমেন্টটার যে ঢেলে সাজিয়ে আমার মনে আছে আমরা বেশ ভালো নম্বর পেয়েছিলাম. What I am trying to say here is very simple. I would address not as a board chair right now, but as a professor, and Professor Dr. Mohammad Farashuddin, because he delivered a speech which is packed with intellectual proposition and idea. And I would love to address him today as the professor of economics. The reason that I talked on Kobor Kobita is because it was a short poem, although Professor Farashuddin has taken almost 45 to 50 minutes to address. But I believe if we would like to analyze each one of these aspects, it would be a volume of 500, perhaps. So that's the whole idea of referring to Kobor Kobita in this particular case. I'd like to thank Nereen Khan Sriti Bokta o Sammodhana Onushthaner jara organizer, them, because of coming up with a topic which is very much a relevant thing for us, and especially for two reasons that I would like to highlight, which is number one, that our interim government tried to come up with a constitutional reform, and they did propose. And then after that, we had elected government. Yes, there is a hesitancy of accepting all of it, what was suggested, but they also mentioned that there are bits and pieces which we could adjust, adapt, and look into more closely whether that could be part of the constitutional reform or not. And here we are giving our third opinion, if you like, on the same issue, which is a national issue. And I believe that then in a small way, our university is contributing on a critical issue for our nation at a national level. And thank you very much for organizing that. And thank you very much to Professor Farashuddin for accepting the invitation and giving us this particular speech. This is fantastic in a sense that it gives everyone to take away something from this speech. If we talk about my students here, they will take away something that how the country is being run and how should it be run possibly, and this would give them something to think about. On the other hand, my academic friends who are especially in law and constitutional law, possibly this speech would give them some idea of doing some or conducting some research in few areas that Professor Farashuddin has expressed or proposed here. For the general audience, of course, this is something that we could think about, that how do we implement these things in a nation like Bangladesh? Perhaps that is the most important aspect and a challenging aspect for all of us. In this speech, there were big things and big ideas on one hand, like constitutional reform, the relationship between prime minister and the president and things like that. On the other hand, he expressed some of the very nitty-gritty or an operational level, that how do you collect the tax, or what should be the traffic signals, and how do you manage the traffic system. So those are all at a operational level. Knowing Professor Farashuddin and working with him very closely for the last 2.5 years, I understand him very well, that he's a person who looks at a big thing. At the same time, he would like to touch on the operational things at the same time. And that's the reason that he touched on the big thing and the smaller things as well. It simply shows that there is an element of pragmatism and hands-on things that he loves to look at. I'm not going to touch on everything that he has mentioned, but I will pick and choose on a few things which are perhaps the bigger issues for a nation that he has mentioned. One is, Professor Farashuddin has clearly identified that what are the limitations with the Westminster sort of a democracy compared to proportional representation, and the advantages and disadvantages he has mentioned there. That in a Westminster sort of a democracy where the winner takes all, whereas if you have a proportional representation, then of course the smaller parties, smaller groups may be elected, and they may have a say in running the country, on deciding on a policy matters for the nation. Just to mention to you that many of us maybe are getting familiarity with the proportionate representation system. But I read an article in Jai Jai Din, একটা সাপ্তাহিক পত্রিকা এখনো আছে হয়তোবা, ওই পত্রিকার মধ্যে তখন একজন কলামিস্ট, যার নাম হয়তো বেশিরভাগ মানুষই শোনেনি, his name is Firdaus Ahmed Qureshi. And he was a student leader at Dhaka University in 60s. And Mr. Qureshi, because of his political activism within the university, he was actually rusticated from Dhaka University. And possibly he could finish his honors degree. And by the time he was 65, he finished his PhD from the UK. Took him a long time, but he could finish his PhD at the end of his life. And it was almost 5 years that he has passed away quietly. But he was the one who has written an article on proportionate representation in Jai Jai Din back in 80s. And when people are talking about proportional representation right now, I was thinking that that person possibly was the first in this country formally opening up that particular aspect of election system. It is important to understand that how these two systems works. It's a part of the democratic process. But Professor Farashuddin has mentioned that yes, there could be limitation of Westminster type government or election. However, that if we go for proportional representation, then I looked at these articles, I read through, I said, wow, is that correct? But a developing nation may have much more complex problem, and a complex problem may ask for complex solution. And why should that be a simple solution? I drew a conclusion. I myself, on that basis, I wrote a 7-page short paper for an war journal at that time. And I did argue that not necessarily that the simple OR or simple solution is always an appropriate solution for a developing nation. Complex solution may become a more appropriate solution. In this particular case, I'm not too sure whether a complex solution would be the right solution to consider, but we can think about that particular issue. Towards the end, I would summarize the entire thing by possibly 3 words. One is space, giving space. It's not simply physical space that we are talking about. জুম্বার নামাজ থেকে প্রতি শুক্রবার যখন আমরা মসজিদ থেকে বের হই, একজনের গায়ে গায়ে লেগে যায় বের হওয়ার সময়. What does that mean? Are we in a rush really? Or this is just our behavior that we are not giving a space to one another? And yes, this is a physical space then. And meaning that all parties, political parties or all entities should have right to demonstrate. And that space, physical space, has to be given. And space is also mental and psychological space as well. And how do you give that? In a conversation between 2 or more people, most of the time, we like to talk and make our point and not to listen to others. That space has to be given and created, that we talk and give a space to the others to talk. And that is what I see is a space given to 2 people, a space given between 2 analytics, given to 2 politicians, and given to 2 or more political parties to converse and make their point clear. And that space has to be given.